So we're going to start here with, again, I'm going to do a short introduction to Rafał Lemkin. You may know Rafał Lemkin as the person who coined the term genocide and who pushed for the UN to accept and later ratify the UN Genocide Convention. But that was not the beginning of it. It all began before World War II when Rafał Lemkin, a very well-known and respected Warsaw lawyer, who also happened to be Jewish, started working on developing new crimes as a lawyer. Because he was aware of the Armenian genocide. It wasn't called a genocide then. And he started working on two new crimes. One of them was called the crime of barbarism, and the other was called the crime of vandalism. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this story, with this history. The first crime of barbarism was basically the framework for what became genocide. It basically spoke of wanting to destroy a group, etc. It basically had the same points as what constitutes a genocide, but the name back then for it was barbarism. The second crime, the second new crime that Lemkin was working on was the crime of vandalism, which was the crime of destroying tangible cultural artifacts, heritage, like art, books, antiques, buildings, and things like that. Lemkin argued that destroying those things is not just a loss for a particular group that loses these cultural things. It's a loss for the entirety of humanity. So he argued that the entirety of humanity should be interested in prosecuting and punishing the destruction of such things. So now we go forward to after World War II. The Holocaust happened, and Lemkin sort of concluded that the word barbarism is not strong enough to encapsulate the crime of destroying a group of people in part or in whole. So he coined the term genocide from two parts. Genes, which is Greek for people, and icide for like in homicide, patricide, etc. Genocide. The term was born. And so Lemkin did a huge effort to push it to the UN, to get it accepted. It took him a long time to get it actually ratified. And of course, Lemkin envisioned a far wider scope to the convention. He identified groups that sort of would be targeted for genocide. It was the religious groups, and he wrote in the religious groups with the Armenians in mind because of the Armenian genocide, because the Ottoman Empire did not even accept a category of nationhood, of nations and national identity. The Ottoman Empire considered the Armenians to be a religious group, and so did the Young Turks when they did the Armenian genocide. So that's why you have the religious group in the Genocide Convention. Racial groups. That one was created because of the Holocaust, because Jewish people were seen as a separate race from all other Europeans. This is why religious groups, right? Lemkin also wanted to include political and social groups into the Genocide Convention. And those were to be added specifically because of the atrocities committed by the USSR on political and social groups. And of course, the Soviet Union was the biggest opponent to having those groups in the Genocide Convention. So it was crossed out. Also, Lemkin wanted the crime of vandalism to be part of the Genocide Convention, so the destruction of art and other cultural heritage. And that also did not make it into the Genocide Convention. Unfortunately, because of course, okay, there's a very important conversation we need to have when we talk about genocide and the Genocide Convention. And that is how genocide is viewed now and how it was viewed. That would include queer people. Yes, absolutely. And how it was viewed before the war. So, after the Armenian genocide, the new Turkish government wanted to quietly execute the perpetrators of the Armenian genocide, so they fled abroad. And one of these people who took part in the Armenian genocide was killed by an Armenian survivor in an act of justice, you could say. And that person was arrested. And rightfully so, Rafał Lemkin he talked with someone about it and asked, why is it that Turkey murdering the Armenians is not considered a crime, but the Armenian killing the perpetrator of the killing is considered a crime? Why is that? And the answer was, that is because it is the sovereign right of every country to do as it pleases with its citizens, and that includes killing them. It is a country's business as to what it does with its citizens, okay? And he gave an analogy. If you have an owner of a group of chicken, it is well within the owner's rights to kill the chicken and eat them or whatever. But if someone tries to come in and try to stop the owner of the chicken from killing them, now that is a crime because you encroach on someone's property. And that is exactly how it was viewed before the war. Citizens were basically viewed as the chicken, and the state was viewed as the owner, okay? And it was Rafał Lemkin's biggest hope, and he had to be very careful with this, okay? He had to be extremely careful in navigating the acceptance of the Genocide Convention by the US. Not by the US, by the UN. Because if the Genocide Convention would be first accepted and then ratified, and many countries abstained from ratifying it, I'll get to that in a moment. Then it was Lemkin's goal to strip away that sovereignty from states, from individual states, okay? Because genocide would now become an internationally charged crime. All the ratified countries could charge individual states with the crime of genocide. Right? So individual states would no longer have just the sovereignty to do whatever they please with their citizens, which would include murdering them, or the destruction of whole groups, okay? Before it was considered, and this is why, and this is also very interesting, you know the Nuremberg trials, right? You know how the Nazis were charged with... Actually, the Nazis were never charged with genocide. Remember that. They were charged with murder, with mass murder and individual murder. But you know what? While the Nazis were charged with killing European Jewish people, they were never charged with killing German Jewish people. And that was because that was considered part of Germany's sovereignty, so it couldn't be charged. You see? The Nazis were never tried for killing the German Jewish people. That was Germany's sovereign right to do what it pleased with the German Jewish people. But killing Jewish people from other countries now, that's a crime. You see? And that's how it was handled during the trials of the Nazis. Right? And the Genocide Convention was supposed to change all that. It was a big game changer. The US did not ratify the Genocide Convention in Lemkin's lifetime. Enough places ratified it so that it became active, so that it became law. Sort of, it became a thing. But for example, the US did not ratify it within Lemkin's lifetime. And similarly, interestingly enough, Lemkin himself was very disillusioned. By the time he was dying, he was very disillusioned with the whole thing. He considered his greatest effort, his greatest work in his life to be a failure. He considered it to be a spectacular failure. And he basically predicted a world in which countries would commit genocides and international justice would not be able to reach those countries. They would just do it and nothing could be done about it. And I am sad to say that Raphael Lemkin was correct. Look at the Uyghur genocide in China. Does international justice do anything about it? No. What about what's happening in Israel-Palestine thing right now? Crickets. So, unfortunately, there is a really strong point to be made that the Genocide Convention was not able to fulfill the promise or the goal with which it was created. And that was my little ramble on the Genocide Convention. Oh, yes. One last thing about Lemkin, okay? Because his story was pretty tragic. Only, believe it or not, for a long time he was unknown. He actually became known fairly recently. I'll check it. Fairly recently. And only 6 people attended his funeral. You know, the person that coined the term genocide and worked tooth and nail to actually, for the UN to implement it, to accept it and then ratify it. And then only 6 people. 6 people came to his funeral. That is really sad. And he was basically delegated to obscurity for a really long time, and he only became known fairly recently. Really, really unfortunate.